Maybe it's time to talk about the worst books I read in 2023. Hello fellow readers, book lovers, and anyone else who's watching. I'm Emily at Midnight. Welcome to my channel. Before anyone asks, yes, I did dye my hair. It's purple. I love it. As for the background, I'm just trying different things out to see what I like. Feel free to let me know what you like. January has been a month, which is why it's not January anymore, and I'm finally getting around to making a video about my least favorite books that I read in 2023. Contrary to previous videos, this is a year wrap-up where I genuinely disliked a lot of the books I'm about to talk about. So I'm really excited to dive into it. I'll be talking about 6 books. I'll be ranking them from least bad to most bad, starting with some that were just mildly disappointing, but we'll definitely delve into the territory of books that I disliked. Let's dive right in with number 6, the book that was least offensive to me out of this list. Cassandra Speaks, When Women Are the Storytellers, The Human Story Changes by Elizabeth Lesser. Okay, I came into this book with high expectations. I was expecting a deep dive of the women throughout history and the stories that they did tell or would have told, or the stories that were twisted about them and what the real story was. Something exciting and novel in that way. But unfortunately, that wasn't what the book was. It was more of a philosophical look into how the world can change when women have the power, which is certainly an interesting thing to talk about, but it wasn't what was sold to me in the book. It was definitely marketed as sort of a history type of nonfiction book, talking about Cassandra, a popular woman of myth, as well as these other women, Pandora, Eve, these women that myths were written about as a way to put womankind down. And so I definitely expected there to be some sort of twist on that, like here's the real story of Cassandra, the real story of Pandora, when in reality that just isn't what this book is. It had many good ideas and takes on women in power. It was definitely idea based, not history based, and felt like a fairly surface level look into the subjects. I also saw a review of it that called it a collection of scattered essays, and I really get that, because there were moments where I could tell it was trying to talk about history, and other times where it was talking about modern politics, and other times it was talking about meditation and how to have better mental health, but it wasn't very well organized, with a lot of the ideas seeming unconnected and disjointed. Like I mentioned, at the end it had a lot of really good ideas about mental health and meditation. Nothing that was particularly novel, but I will probably follow her guided meditation at some point. I'm always glad to read a woman's journey to self-actualization and enlightenment and empowerment, but ultimately I think this book might have served better as a memoir of her journey. Her life really does seem quite interesting. She spoke to a lot of really intelligent people to put this book together and seemed to grow a lot as a person, but unfortunately, because of the way that she wrote the book, she wasn't able to put that in the forefront in a way that I think would have been far more beneficial than the disjointed collection of essays that it turned out to be. Coming in at number 5, we have The Selection by Kiera Cass. My first thought on finishing this book was, that was book 1? We follow the main character in her everyday life for quite a while in the book, and it takes till about a quarter of the way into the book to get into the real story of what the book and the series is about. And even from there, we continue to spend more time than necessary exploring every aspect of her daily life, including some uneventful afternoons that she spends reading or something. We really just walk through every moment of her life in a way that is absolutely unnecessary. I won't say that I was ever bored by the book, but that doesn't mean it was well paced. It was still incredibly slow moving when it came to the plot. The plot of the whole series is that a girl named America gets selected for what is basically a real life version of The Bachelor. Basically, their crown prince in this country is going to select his bride out of a group of women that are selected from across the country. And they very much live in the same place, very big Bachelor vibes here. But the book spends so long with the pre-selection era of her life, and then just wading through the weeds of everything that happens in the selection, that by the end of the first book, we've gotten to what would be week 1 of The Bachelor. So if you watch The Bachelor or any similar dating show, which clearly I do, you would know that week 1 is basically just the introductory week. It's the setup. You get to meet the different participants and watch as they attempt to start to form connections with the main love interest, and then in the end, ultimately the first wave of them are sent home. So basically that's what happens with the book. We get to watch as America and the other girls are interacting with each other and Prince Maxim, and eventually by the end of the book, he sends the first group of girls home, to my memory. And it feels like, wow, we finally got to the next step. Oh, and the book is over.
Huh?
So you end up reading an entire book, which turns out to just be setup for the rest of the series, which is very frustrating. I would much rather lose some of the nice scenes if it means that the story actually gets to where it's promised in book one. That said, I don't know what the rest of the series holds. It's possible that as I read the rest of the series, this choice to end the book where it is and pace it as they have will make sense. I'll have to withhold judgment on that one. But my guess is that the whole series is going to end up feeling like one book. As for the characters, America is far too not like other girls for my tastes, but I will read it within the lens of its time. This was a book published in 2012, which was the height of not like other girls vibes.
I'm a guy's girl, so most of my friends are guys. My friends made me practice small talk with females about things that I don't care about.
And so I can be a little bit forgiving there. Prince Maxim is by far the most interesting character in the book, which is unusual, I will say, because typically when you watch reality dating shows, the person that they're all vying for is the least interesting person on the show. So I'll give the book that. But with the weight being placed on character development for America and Maxim, you definitely see the characterization of the other girls fall flat. They're very one-dimensional, you don't get much fleshed out with them. Aspen, who, spoiler, is the other love interest, because what is a 2010s book without a love triangle? Honestly, Aspen has very little going for him. I can forgive that because I was once a teenager in love with a very mid guy, but it is disappointing in a romance book to have one of the main leads be that uninteresting. And I certainly hope that by the end of the series, America can tell by comparison to Prince Maxim just how mid Aspen is. Honestly, here's the thing. It was disappointing, it wasn't well paced, but it was at least interesting. And so I'll probably end up continuing to read the series. I haven't decided yet. We'll see if inspiration strikes and I decide to continue the series. So far, I just keep putting it back on my hold list every time it comes up. Who knows? But I will be really upset if America ruins things with Maxim because of milquetoast Aspen. I'll be so upset. Coming in at number 4, we have The Summer I Turned Pretty by Jenny Han. I have really mixed feelings about this book. I will give it to her. Jenny Han did a wonderful job catching the whimsy and magic of summer and first love. The tone of the book is amazing and leaves you feeling nostalgic for memories that aren't yours. And in that way, it's masterfully done. What I really didn't like though was the low-level partner abuse vibes. The main character, who goes by Belly, gets grabbed and pulled around multiple times in a protective way that's really quite disrespectful. She also expresses wishing that her crush would hit her when he gets angry, which I don't think I need to express is an absolutely horrible thing to romanticize in a book, especially one aimed at a younger audience such as this one. The main aspect that I disliked about this book, however, is personal, and I will own that. This book takes place at a summer cabin where Belly, her brother, and her mom's close friend and 2 sons all get together for a few weeks in the summer. Belly is the youngest and has always been treated like a kid and left out either because she's a girl or because she's the youngest. All throughout the book, she expresses these feelings in such a poignant way, which hit painfully close to home as a youngest girl who grew up in a neighborhood full of boys. The pain of always being purposefully left behind and left out is a betrayal that sticks with you. So to then have Belly enter into a relationship with a character that perpetrated a lot of this hurt throughout her entire life to that point definitely hurt my heart, especially because there's never a moment where Belly gets to truly explain how they hurt her and have them really listen, including the person she ends up dating. Without that communication, there's no reconciliation, and it ends up just being a story of a girl who put aside her feelings and her pain to be better liked, and I hate that. Throughout the book, these boys who are her closest friends and family unapologetically treat her like a child and less than for being a girl. And the moral of every interaction throughout the book is that if Belly were to lighten up, then everything would be better. And there's no resolution for this aspect of the plot. I know that there are books that come later, but it was so hard to get through this book that I don't know if I can get to those later books. I'll applaud Jenny Han for how well she expresses the hurt that these sorts of situations can cause, but I'm so disappointed that there was no resolution, not even in Belly's own head. As a reader who can relate all too well from my younger years, it made the book painful and melancholic rather than whimsical and nostalgic. Number 3 is Just My Type by Fallon Ballard. We're getting into the territory of the books that I genuinely disliked. For starters, it took until 40% of the way into this book for me to actually be engaged and interested in the story. Now, you might say, Emily, why did you keep reading? 40% is almost halfway through the book. If you were still disinterested in it that long, why didn't you just put it down? And I would say that's a great question and I have no answer for you. Well, I have sort of an answer. I really wanted to like this book. By all accounts, it should be like my favorite book. For starters, it's a second chance romance, so I should adore it. But the main character, Lana, was so full of general trauma and specific trauma around the male lead, Seth, that every moment for nearly half the book was horrifying, as I had to slog through high levels of trauma and anxiety rather than enjoying the hijinks of a romance book. That's not to say that stressful books that deal with a lot of trauma aren't my cup of tea. They are, but only when that's what I'm looking for. I'm happy to dig through the depths of someone's screwed up life when I'm reading a memoir or literary fiction where that's the point of the book. But that's not what I come to my lighthearted romances for. Even in romance, I've read several romances where characters wade through a lot of trauma to take care of themselves and get ready for that happy ending. And I've seen it done really well, but this book was not one of them. Slogging through over 150 pages of anxiety and embarrassing encounters before I even start to feel the pull of the story or the romantic tension start to build just doesn't work for romance. However, once we get into it, there are things that I liked about the book. Don't worry. Lana and Seth's relationships and their feelings about each other and ultimately the possibility of them getting back together, that all worked for me really well. The reasons why they're both heartbroken, the fact that they're both still in love with each other, and why it wasn't a simple fix to get back together, those all landed really well for me. There was no miscommunication trope, no third act breakup. They just had to process their lives, history, and current circumstances before a resolution could be made. But on the other hand, Lana actually turns out to be a little bit of an unreliable narrator. She not only focuses exclusively on her pain from their previous relationship, but she barely even reveals any reason that he might have for pain, which makes it really hard to empathize with Seth. I'll lightly spoil some of the book here to explain their past, but I won't spoil the entire plot. Seth and Lana had dated all throughout high school, and they had plans to, I think, go to LA together for college, but ultimately last minute after Lana had already moved out to LA, Seth decided not to join her. This obviously hurt Lana, but they continued to date long distance. But then after a short while, he ended up breaking up with her, simply because he didn't want to hold her back at college, but he didn't give her any explanation or any chance to say, "You wouldn't be holding me back, I still want to be with you." He unilaterally made that decision himself, and it hurt her a lot. But then, at their high school reunion 2 years previous to the book starting, Lana got drunk and asked him to sleep with her, despite the fact that she was currently with another guy and had been dating him for 2 years. Seth understandably rejected her, which not only broke her heart, but also hurt her pride, and she held on to that pain up until the present day. But she blatantly ignores how messed up it was for her to ask that, and the position that she put him in. She never once considers how he might feel having the woman that he still has feelings for ask him to sleep with her casually when she's literally in a relationship with another man. In the book, there's literally only one moment where Seth explains his hurt, when he accuses her of using him again for her own feelings, which is accurate on both counts, past and present. If you read the book, you'll know what I'm talking about. And that's the only moment where we see his pain in the entire book. That moment really brings home the wrongness of her actions and how they hurt him in the past. And even in that moment, she really only brushes over it because she's so busy being the victim. Having an unreliable narrator is not necessarily a bad thing in a book, but I'm not convinced it was intentional. A part of me wonders if the author actually sides with Lana, since she brushes over Seth's pain and never ever comes back to it. Lana does technically apologize to Seth before his outburst, but honestly, what she did was really shitty and hurtful and not something that can be brushed aside with one simple apology. I wish the book would have really taken time to sit with their feelings and watch them learn to trust each other again. We just spent so much of the book wading through trauma and anxiety, and the payoff at the end wasn't big enough to make up for it. There isn't a third act breakup because they don't even figure out that they want to be together until the very last moment. I'm not upset about when they got together in their story, but ending the book so soon after you finally catch a breath left me feeling pent up and out of energy. I've noticed that it can be kind of hard for romance authors to sit with a story after the leading duo say "I love you," but every fantasy reader and author knows that you can't end a story at a climax. There has to be some good falling action and resolution before we tie up the loose ends in an epilogue. Just look how long the last Lord of the Rings movie took with the hobbits in the Shire before they show Frodo leaving again as a sort of epilogue. And this isn't a movie. In books, you have even more time to bring the story full circle with a pleasant ending. And this book keeps you in the weeds for so long that I really felt cheated not having a moment to sit with Seth and Lana finally happy. I wanted to like this book. No, I wanted to love this book. Instead, it put me in a reading slump when I refused to DNF it for 3 months. And on to number 2, Maggie Moves On by Lucy Score. I'll start by saying there were elements about this book that I liked. There were excellent side characters with good development, cute animals, a compelling non-romantic aspect to the plot, and a bit of intrigue to boot. But it just wasn't my cup of tea. First off, I don't love a plot where the girl is convinced to give up her dreams and move to a small town for a man, which comes up far more often than you would expect in the romance genre, but maybe it's not that surprising if you think of the plot of every Hallmark movie. I will say that this book was very inoffensive with its approach to this sort of plot. Ultimately, they were able to convince me that that was something that she genuinely wanted, and so I'll give them points for that. But it's still not my vibe. Next, I'm super picky when it comes to dirty talking, and I wasn't a fan of how this book did it. Specifically, we were in the male lead's head for half of the book, and he framed almost everything about his interaction with her as like animalistic urges, which just gives me the ick and makes me feel a little unsafe. He also pulled the whole "she's mine" thing over and over again in his head and out loud, and they were never dating at any of those points. But worst of all, basically the entire plot was him telling her to just give in to me, which low-key made my skin crawl. I won't yuck your yum. If you like that, that's fine, but that is so not my vibe. Okay, this is a nitpicky thing, but it's also hilarious. The author seemed to think that Idaho is the Wild West. I don't know how to explain this. As someone who lives near Idaho, I can promise you that while it is in the West, it is about as far from the Wild West as one can get. Sure, there are people who have farms sometimes, but that doesn't make it the Wild West. Like, for example, just because Billy the Kid went through Utah doesn't mean that Utah still has saloons and ghost stories. And the same goes for Idaho. Like, it's possible that certain areas of Idaho still know the stories of when white people first settled there because it wasn't too terribly long ago, but they aren't the main features of a town, like this author seemed to think. Nor do Idahoans have southern accents and say things like darlin'. Maybe try Texas? I don't know, somewhere besides Idaho. But an even bigger issue that I had in this book was the misogyny. You know, there were a couple moments where he picked up the girl and threw her over his shoulder, which is not okay, and also places where he just took her where he wanted to take her because he knew what was best. No. There was also a lot of overly possessiveness from someone who was not the boyfriend. Even then, is it okay? We have questions. And there were also moments of him absolutely ignoring that she doesn't like what he's doing, and ultimately her just deciding to go along with it to make the issue go away. Those themes all make me uncomfortable and angry on a primal level, because I feel unsafe when men think that they can control women's autonomy, and especially when it's condoned by others. My biggest issue with the book, though, is that the relationship doesn't actually feel consensual. So, big red flag.
Hey guy, fella.
And if it's not non-consensual, then it's at least an unintentional relationship, which isn't much better in the circumstances. This is my spoiler warning for you. I'm going to spoil the plot of the book. If you don't want it spoiled for you, skip ahead to this time mark. Basically, the whole relationship is based on the fact that the two main characters are super attracted to each other and just want to bone. But she has a rule to never date a contractor that she hires for her house flipping business, and also really doesn't want to plant roots somewhere. Maggie is adamant on moving on after this house flip, hence the name of the book. And even when she basically relents to having sex with him, she makes it very clear that she is not dating him. But he promptly ignores her wishes and drags her to a family dinner that she's uncomfortable being at, and calls himself her boyfriend in direct contrast to what she has said and how she feels. And for the whole rest of the book, he basically has just decided for her that they're in a relationship. Continually throughout the book, she says no to each of his advances, and then he wears her down until she agrees, which is crossing boundaries 101. And if all of that weren't bad enough, he has the nerve to be pissed when he finds out that she has a sister who she never told him about. It's so manipulative to wear her down until she gives in to dating you, and then get mad when she hasn't been as open with you as you have when you were forcing your life on her. It's so unhealthy and harmful and icky, and I really, really hated that. It sucks because there was a lot that I really liked about this book, but the actual romance in the romance book felt a lot like an episode of Dateline. All right, we finally come to the worst book that I read in all of 2023. Drumroll, please. Number 1 is The Lord of the Flies by William Golding. Most people have heard of this book if they didn't have to read it in high school, and so I don't know how much of a premise I need to give, but I'll give a brief explanation. The story basically goes that a group of boys crash land on an abandoned island and quickly devolve into evil, murderous little demons that turn on each other. The premise, then, is that humans, when left without the structure of society, turn into bloodthirsty beasts. But that just doesn't happen. In fact, in the 1960s, a group of boys actually were shipwrecked on an abandoned island, and all reports of it show that it was actually really wholesome, with zero murder or bloodthirsty events. I have some clips here of one of the articles that The Guardian wrote about this incident and what actually happened. Feel free to pause on any of these clips if you want to read more, and I'll also have the article linked in the description. I just felt really sick while reading this book because William Golding is clearly trying to point out the harshness of human society, and I won't pretend that that doesn't exist. Within human civilization, human society, we harm each other. There are some really nasty people and some people that have committed really nasty crimes. I'm not trying to pretend that that doesn't happen. But beyond all of that, one fact that has been proven true about humanity time and time again is that when trauma strikes, humans come together, help each other, and grow closer through shared trauma. This horrible book shows the underbelly of what corruption in society may lead people to do to each other. But William Goldberg writes it as if it is the truth about humankind's nature. It's true that sometimes people can become very horrible, but true life experiences of people stuck together in life or death situations typically inspire hope, not fear. I have always held to the belief that humankind is naturally good at its core, and I do believe that data backs up that belief. And while there are people who are willing to abuse others for power, that does tend to be the exception rather than the rule. The only reason we may sometimes feel otherwise is because those few people that are monsters typically work their way up into prominent positions of society that allow them to commit atrocities. William Goldberg wrote this book based on his experience in a British boys' boarding school, which are notorious for the abuse that happens there based on the structure or lack thereof. It's very clear that William Goldberg had a terrible experience at boarding school and as a result has a very cynical view on society. That's both sad for him and horrible for us, since this book has been adopted as the paragon of human nature, even though it's just one bitter old man's musings. Alright, that's all my thoughts on the 6 worst books that I read in 2023. I hope it was sufficiently entertaining. Thank you so much for watching. I would love to hear from you in the comments if you've read these books, if you agree or disagree with my takes on them. And if you liked this video, please feel free to give it a like and subscribe for future videos. Also, feel free to follow my Goodreads and Instagram, all of which are Emily at Midnight and linked below. I currently have a giveaway up on my Instagram for other bookstagrammers, so if you have a bookish Instagram account, be sure to check that out. Have a wonderful day, treat people with respect, and pick up a book. I don't own any of these books because I hate them, so I've just used A Tale of Two Cities without the cover on it. That's fine, right?